Hello, and welcome to the Veterans History Project. I'm John Knotts, and we're doing another episode for the Library of Congress. It is the 1st of May of the year 2016, and we're here at the beautiful studios at Metro East Community Media here in Gresham, Oregon, and I like to refer to it as the gateway to the Columbia Gorge, but Fairview and Troutdale would probably argue with me, but suffice it to say it is beautiful. And I'm here with Shalon Dittler, who is an Army veteran, and like we usually do on our programs, we're just going to chat. We're going to start from square one, and we'll hopefully go to Z and find out a little bit about the life of people who serve our country. Shalon, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure to be here.
These are very easy questions.
Good.
Where were you born?
I was born and raised in Portland, Oregon.
In Portland, Oregon.
Emmanuel Hospital.
Emmanuel, I'll be darned.
Right.
And you went to high school where?
I went the first 2 years at Grant High School in Portland, and then we moved to Vancouver. So I graduated from Hudson's Bay in Vancouver. Familiar
with both high schools. You're familiar with Mr. Holland's Opus?
Yes, I am.
We did a lot of filming at Grant High School.
Yes, I know.
It was called Kennedy High School, wasn't it?
It was.
Oh, we had a lot of fun there. And you, at what point in your life, and let me back up a little bit. What did your folks do?
My mom was a stay-at-home mom and then did daycare, and my dad was an accountant for the state. He died when I was young. I was 8 years old when he died, and my mom never remarried, but she basically was able to stay home because of PERS and life insurance until I think I was in junior high when she started working at a daycare, just to make extra.
Why did I'm sorry to hear about your father, by the way, even though it might have been quite a few years ago. What was the cause of that?
He had cirrhosis of the liver, and it was caused because his parents were alcoholics, and so he was abused and malnourished as a child, and then his liver never really functioned properly. And so he was in the Army, and the Army doctor said he had a vitamin A deficiency, so put him on vitamin A, but never told him that he needed to go off of it eventually. And so over time, the vitamin A, he stayed on it, and with his liver being weak, it overdosed in his system. And so he developed cirrhosis of the liver.
Another issue we need to take a look at outside of the military, don't we?
Right.
The child abuse, and we could talk about that forever, and how it's passed down from generation to generation, physically and mentally, and how children suffer even in the womb if the mother and father are doing something that's a little bit off-kilter.
Right.
But, so your mother, by what you just told me, had a full-time job?
No, she...
I correct you, that is a full-time job.
Well, yes, yes, you're right, you're right. I'm a mom, I should know that. I never get a day off. There is no vacation time. I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, both little boys.
And that's a full-time job.
Oh, it is definitely a full-time job.
I babysit my newest great little grandson. Oh, wow. And still changing diapers, you know, as it were. But it's a full-time job, so I never discount a mother, because that is 24/7.
Right, so. You just don't get paid for it. You don't get paid vacations, none of that.
Versus as your father, you know, working for the state or you know, that type of a job, we don't look at it as the same. So, what'd you do in school? Did you do any sports? What were your interests in school?
I sang. I did a lot of singing, so I was in the choirs. I was in, at Grant High School, I was in musicals, the plays. And I really enjoyed theater and drama. But when I moved to Bay, they had a very close-knit, very small theater program. So they only put on very small productions. So Grant High School had huge productions. I was in Anything Goes. I was in Cabaret. So a few of those, the big productions, I could be extras because they had a lot of extras. They had, you know, the choir, the chorale, and all of that. But at Bay, they only did small. They did like a Hamlet, which was only like the characters in Hamlet. And so I really didn't get to do drama in in high school, or in my junior and senior year. But I did do choir, and I was a part of the girls' choral ensemble for my sophomore, or that was at Bay in Vancouver, my junior and senior year.
I'm glad to hear that, because let me ask you, I have an opinion of music and drama and theater and film and acting in general, having taught it and done it for years. And this is a lead-in to a follow-up I'm going to do with you. What did you take away from the music and the drama, your involvement, from a creative standpoint, or learning how to be you?
I was always very vocal. I was always very outgoing, very extroverted. But a lot of my friends were uncomfortable with that. So when I was in drama or when I was in the choir, it was an appropriate way to express myself without, you know, I mean, when you're in high school, everything seems huge and dramatic and big, and when your friends, you know, and some of them, sometimes it was okay. We had a lot of fun. We did a lot of things, but sometimes they would get a little annoyed with me always singing or always, you know, being dramatic. So that was an outlet for me that was appropriate, and nobody had a problem with it.
I'm glad you said it was an outlet. My follow-up would simply be that having volunteered for 3 years on with Health and Human Services in a specific county here in Oregon, working with children under the age of 18 that weren't involved in anything and got sidetracked and got into trouble, that I would highly recommend acting or choir or music, band, something creative, and finding out that many of them would have liked to have done that. Conversely, I've recommended that veterans get involved in drama and music if they come back and go to a community college, because I found, and many actors throughout the years, like Jimmy Stewart, and you can go down the list of Rod Steiger and some of the greatest that have gone into acting because that was a way to express themselves. So I understand exactly what you're talking about, and I find it very interesting.
And after high school, I started dancing.
Another creative activity.
Oh yeah, and I really preferred partner dancing, and I was really, really good. I'd been in, when I was little, I was in gymnastics, so I was pretty limber, and I was pretty small, and I actually had, because of the singing, I had pretty good rhythm and stuff. So my favorite dancing, and I could do all the ballroom dances. I could do all the swing.
Oh boy!
And but salsa dancing was my very favorite. And I have a story about that too.
Well, I'd like to hear it.
Well, so
before we get you on Dancing with the Stars.
Right before I get me. Yeah. Well, one of my outlets after I graduated was there was a club in Portland called Andrea's Cha-Cha Club. It was at the Grand Cafe. It's no longer in existence, but but they would have Thursdays and Friday nights. They would have pretty much open salsa dancing, and I didn't have a lot of friends that were into that, but it was the kind of environment where I felt safe enough that I could go, and you know, I knew some steps, and so I could learn some steps, so I did. I actually got really, really good at it. I got even better when I was in Guantanamo Bay, because I was stationed there with the Puerto Rican National Guard. And I was one of the few females that could really salsa dance. So, and every week they had salsa night at the Windjammer, which was their ballroom / everything, ballroom. So every week I was kicking it with the Puerto Ricans, and I was really good. I got really, really good. I probably could have been on Dancing with the Stars. So, yeah.
So you had a lot of involvement with the Puerto Ricans and the Cubans and.
Not Cubans, actually. Cubans stayed in their own little corner, and we stayed in ours. Yeah.
So it was a Puerto Rican involvement. That's interesting.
But they were deployed there with the National Guard.
National Guard.
So
Puerto Rico.
And
yeah.
So.
So that creative ability. Did you do any sports?
I did swimming.
Swimming's good. Swimming's good.
I did at Grant High School had they had a swim team, so I was on the swim team my freshman and sophomore year. Bay didn't have that, so I wasn't in on a swim team my last 2 years, but I still kept it up pretty active.
So, how did you make a decision to go into the Army or National Guard?
It was reserves, Army Reserves.
Army Reserves, and there is a difference. There is a definite difference.
Yeah. So, with my dad dying and other things, I had a pretty traumatic childhood. When I got about 18, I started having flashbacks and not knowing how to deal with all of the stuff, you know, the loss of my father, who we were really, really close. I was Daddy's little girl. And then there was some sexual abuse from some grandfather and neighbor. And so there's just a lot of trauma there. And when I was 18, I decided that I needed to really start dealing with it. So I found a really good counseling program, and they did one-on-one counseling, and they also did weekly small group counseling. And they kind of had a 12-step kind of model where they kind of went through some of the steps, but it was also related to trauma and group counseling. So I went through that for quite a few years and really was able to heal with my counselor and with the group therapy, and then we did, you know, like book lessons and other things. I really was able to heal. So I decided that that's what I wanted. I wanted to do mental health. That's really what I wanted to do. I wasn't sure which flavor, whether, I didn't think I wanted to be a psychiatrist because that's a lot of schooling, just so you could give drugs. So I was like, well, probably.
That's an interesting concept.
Really? And that's kind of, you know, when you're 20, that's kind of how you see things. It's a lot of school just to be able to pass out, you know, medications. So I decided I was going to be a psychologist. The only problem is school is very, very expensive. And I didn't do well. I did well enough in school to graduate, but I did not do well enough to get scholarships or to get, you know, and we weren't, my mother was, you know, we were lower middle class, but we were still middle class, so there wasn't a lot of grants and a lot of other things available. So I knew that if I was going to go to school, I had to have a way to pay for it. And especially back then, the military was a very good way to earn it. However, like my mother was in the Army for 4 years. She was a WAC.
Really?
Right. She was a nurse in the Army, and she was only in for 4 years. And my father was in for 4 years. I have an uncle who retired from the Army. So our family is very supportive of military. So it wasn't like, oh, gee, should I go in the military? My brothers. As soon as they graduated, they both joined the Marines. They were twins, and they went in on the buddy system. So they were already in. So it just made sense for me to join the Army. And I didn't know the laws about how you could keep your job or those kinds of things back then. So I never really joined because, I mean, I kind of went from secretarial job to receptionist job to job and job. But I had a lot of friends at home, and I didn't know how I'd work that going into the Army. I didn't want to be active because I had too many friends. But then 9/11 happened. And I felt really strongly that I needed to serve my country. So it made sense, and I remember speaking to somebody, I think it was maybe a college recruiter, because I was going to Clark College to get my Associate of Arts transfer degree.
Good school.
So I'd started community college just knowing that I could get an AA transfer degree and then figure out what I wanted to do from there. So I had been working on that. I was probably about, I was in it a whole year, and I think it was one of the recruiters on campus. You know, sometimes they have those recruiters on campus. And I started working for TriMet. I was a bus driver for TriMet. I know, little old me behind a big old bus, but it was a good job, well-paying job, great benefits, and I was like, well, I don't, I'd love to join the Army because 9/11, I feel strongly, and I could use college money, but I have this great job, and it's like a career type of job. You don't just give that up to join the Army. But he's like, well, no, there are laws in place that say they cannot fire you while you're on active duty, and in fact, they have to give you leave to go to the military. I'm like, even to join up? He's like, yes, even to join up. You sign on the dotted line, and from then on, they cannot fire you, or they cannot let you go because of your service. I was like, okay then. So I looked at all the things, and I saw that mental health specialist was one of the MOSs, military operational specialists, I think is what they call them. So one of the jobs. And I figured that whatever I did, I would probably end up just doing paperwork. But I figured doing paperwork for a psychologist or a psychiatrist was going to be a lot better than doing paperwork for a dentist, or or doing paperwork for whatever, or doing laundry, or any of those other jobs that females could get back then. So so it was pretty much decided, and I went through the tests, and I scored high enough to do mental health specialist. And I pretty much told my recruiter, I'm like, this is it. If I can't do mental health, I'm not doing it. I'm not here to mess around. I'm here. I have goals. I have life goals, and this is what I'm going to do.
So your interest, it's an interesting path you took, and I wonder now, thinking about your father, if there was any PTSD involved from his military service.
I don't think so. Neither one of them served during wartime.
Mm-hmm. But you don't have to be in combat.
No, that's true.
And let's go back to your own experience. The thing that a lot of people don't realize, and there are a lot of stories like yours that aren't told, that aren't heard about, that should be discussed, that are kept secret for years. And that's PTSD. What you experienced in the abuse. That's PTSD.
Oh, yeah,
post-traumatic
absolutely.
Stress.
Absolutely.
From an incident in time or events that cause that stress. Doesn't have to be in the military.
Oh, absolutely.
It comes from all directions in one's life. So you've taken those experiences, and you were driven into the mental health area. And it's interesting that you chose not to be a psychiatrist, because my impression many times is psychiatrists like to talk to people for 20 or 30 years of their whole career to find out who they themselves are. I don't think we have to find out who we are. I think you know who you are.
Yeah. And through life experiences, I think sometimes you change who you are too.
Nobody said the path was easy.
Oh, right. Who I was at 20, I just celebrated my 42nd birthday. I know I don't look it.
She doesn't.
I have awesome genes.
Who said that? Look like you're just about ready to graduate from high school.
Right. No. So when I joined after 9/11, I was 28. I enlisted at 28 years old.
Late.
Yeah. So, which actually caused some problems, just because I'm small, I'm petite, I look young, and so I actually ended up getting treated like I was one of the, fresh young, when I had, I was 28, so I had quite a bit of life experience. Schooling, a good job, I had my own apartment, my own life, and so that was pretty interesting. Although I kind of expected it. I knew in the military that they're, especially basic training, I knew they were going to build you up to tear you down to rebuild you. I mean,
that's the way it is.
That's kind of the way it is. So it wasn't like a shock or anything. But it was kind of difficult to be treated how I looked and not how I actually was. And I experienced that in Iraq as well.
But you came in your case, with a lot of maturity, a number of life's experiences, and so therefore you being older, did you feel that you had a heads up on understanding what was going on and made it easier to cope with it?
Yeah, and I realized, because part of the reason I didn't join right out of high school is because I had a huge problem with authority. And I knew that. I did not want somebody telling me what to do, telling me when I could go pee, telling me when I could eat, what I could eat, how I could eat, whatever. I didn't want that. I was far too independent and far too stubborn. So part of my working through all of that is learning to accept authority, even when it's not good authority, but just because knowing, okay, I'm in this position, I chose this position, and I need to follow this authority figure, you know, whether I like it or not. So when I went in, I think I was not only my life experience from just being independent, but knowing how to deal with people, being open to deal with authority, and I was ready to roll with the punches. You know, I mean, I knew a lot of it was going to be psychological. You know, I knew that there was never going to come a point where the drill sergeant. I remember we were in basic training, and it was when we wore black boots, and we had to shine them every day. Every morning we spit shine those suckers.
You didn't start with white tennis shoes?
No.
We started
only for running, only certain running, but we had those black boots, and we had a white tile floor in the barracks. You can imagine basic training, you're doing a lot of push-ups. Push-ups get you down, your toes, scuff marks all over, and every single night we had to mop and buff that floor. Every single night we had to get every single little black scuff off that white tile floor. So by morning, when they did the inspection,
oh yes,
you know, we wouldn't have to do push-ups.
Now, where did you go to boot camp?
I went to South Carolina, Fort Sam.
Oh, so you went to the bug-infested region of
I went to Relaxin' Jackson, as they call it.
Relaxin' Jackson.
Relaxin'
the bug-infested part of the United States.
Right.
You see the no-see-ums down there, the little bugs and gnats. So you ended up as a sergeant, E5. Tell me about, here I'm seeing AD to Gitmo and Iraq, and we talked earlier about a little story. What didn't you do at Gitmo? What is it? Tell me again what you didn't do at Gitmo. You didn't sit on the wall? Go ahead, tell me.
Right, we didn't
Give me the line. Give me the line.
Yeah, we were not sitting on the wall 500 yards from Cubans who were trained to kill us. Did not happen. There was not a Marine, not a soldier, not anyone that was worried about the Cubans. Basically, the Cubans smoked their Cuban cigars and drank their alcohol while they were in their huts looking at us and laughing at us because we were the military, the American military, and we did things by the book. So our soldiers were in full gear, drinking water, and yeah.
So the only involvement that Jack Nicholson had in Guantanamo in the movie was probably the Cubans gave him the cigars he was smoking.
Probably. I would imagine that a general could probably get some pretty good Cuban cigars.
So you did, as you referred to, MOS, and there are different, Marine Corps was MOS. You specifically did what while you were at Gitmo? Well,
Gitmo was really, it was fun, but it was also, it had some unique challenges, especially when I was there. So I was mental health. What we did some counseling. We didn't deal with the detainees other than just getting the tours that everybody got. But we dealt with the military personnel who did the detainee operations. So there's basically two sides of Gitmo. You had the naval base, which is, you know, the Marines who stood guard and watched the beaches, the Navy that were support of them, and then you had the Joint Task Force detainee operations. So those were the two sides. The Joint Task Force, JTF Gitmo, was a separate entity. And they did a lot of Army, they did a lot of National Guard, a lot of Reserve, and those were the ones that were in charge of maintaining basically, they did the operating for the detainee operations. So they were the guards, they were they did all of that stuff. And as mental health, we supported them. Now, I was in 2004 is when I was in Gitmo. Spent almost the whole year there. I was there, not only was I there with the Puerto Ricans, which was kind of fun, but I was there with the New Jersey National Guard. Mm-hmm. Those guys had been sent to Gitmo instead of Iraq, but they'd also cleaned up the mess from 9/11 because they were the neighbors. So we actually had a lot of people who were angry because they didn't get to go overseas with their buddies, and they were stuck babysitting their words, terrorists. So it was challenging in that case because, you know, it was kind of a delicate line between, yeah, you're serving your country here, but, you know, you're not out killing the bad guy. You're making sure that they're safe and that they're not being treated badly. So it was, that was an interesting challenge.
It's an interesting trip you took because what you had 2 years, I'm assuming, at Clark. Clark Community College.
Yeah.
And you focused on the health care area. Mm-hmm. And then went into the Army. Mm-hmm. What kind of training did you get to go ahead and pursue a career? What did the Army have available in the mental health area?
Actually, it was very, very extensive. I was quite surprised. Like I said, I thought I would be doing paperwork for mental health people. What I didn't realize is my training was 9 months long. I was at Fort Sam Houston, Texas. Fort Sam, Texas. I spent, 9 months there, solid. That was just for my training. The first couple weeks was the medical side of it, so we learned combat first aid and anatomy. And then every week after that, we would have a little booklet, and we had to memorize, take a test, memorize, take a test, memorize, take a test. One of the guys and I, he was prior service, which means he had done something else in the military, but he was there getting a different MOS, so he was there for mental health. So Murphy would almost always get 98s to 100s. And I would almost always get 98s to 100s. So Murphy and I had this little, it was basically just a penny that we went back and forth. So every time he would get a higher score than me, he would get the penny. And then when I would get a higher score than him, I would get the penny.
So it's not gambling.
No, it wasn't a bet, it wasn't gambling. No, not at all. It was just a friendly little penny that went back and forth between us.
The reason I asked that is, a matter of fact, I went to a baseball game yesterday at Mount Hood Community College, and they were playing Clark College, and a friend of mine is a pitching coach at Clark, and there was a little girl there taking money at the gate that said she wasn't involved in sports any longer, and she was thinking about the military. So it was an opportunity to chat briefly about the career opportunities, whether you want to go Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, or Department of the Navy with the Marine Corps or the Coast Guard. There's so much training, so much education that one can get without spending a dime that you can carry back into civilian life that you wouldn't have otherwise gotten. And your story is absolutely intriguing.
As a matter of fact, so I finished up my AA while I was in Gitmo because I was able to take online classes through their free online college. So I finished up the last few classes that I needed while I was deployed to Gitmo. So when I came back from Gitmo, I had my Associate of Arts transfer degree. I came back from Gitmo in, I think it was in February. Was it in February? Somewhere around there. Just before I went home, the commander of the 1972nd, who had been there previously, called me up and said...
And that's the Combat Stress Unit.
Yes, that's the 1972nd Combat Stress Control Unit, which was my unit. They're based out of Seattle. The commander called me up and said, we have a mission to go to Iraq in December.
I wanted to get to Iraq. Tell me about Iraq.
She asked if I wanted to go. I knew her as a commander. I knew she could be kind of tough, but I also know that she really took care of her troops. And I thought, you know, if I say no, there's always a chance that I could get pulled to go with some stranger, with some people I don't know, I don't trust. So kind of rather the devil you know than the devil you don't. So I agreed. So I actually, before I even got home from Gitmo, I had agreed to go to Iraq. So I got home, I did my, you know, few months of relaxation. I met a man, and I knew I was going to Iraq, so I refused to date him, which means that we weren't physical, but we went out all the time, and we spent a ton of time together, and we'd go to, his buddies all played poker, so we'd go play poker, you know, a couple times a month, and but I wasn't gonna date him because I knew I was leaving for Iraq. So after about 7 months of that, you know, when you spend a lot of time with somebody and you get to know somebody, sometimes you fall in love. So we fell in love, and I decided that when we talked about it, that I wanted to go. It was okay to go to Iraq being engaged. I at first didn't want to. I was like, that's way too much of a commitment to ask somebody, you know, to wait for me while I'm at war, because who knows what can happen. You know, I knew there's not only physical trauma that can happen, but there's a lot of emotional trauma. We ended up getting married 2 weeks before I deployed.
Before you left? We
went to Justice of the Peace. And I got, I didn't get to wear the big flashy diamond. I just got to wear the little band with all the diamonds.
That's pretty. Can we get a camera on that? You want to do that? Can we do that?
I'm not sure which
This story changed very rapidly from not wanting to be engaged to getting married before deployment.
Right. So we had a little ceremony at the Justice of the Peace with just a few people.
There still is a human interest story in the military side of life, isn't there? Yeah, we're always human first.
So I went to Iraq, and I was in Talil, or LSA Adder, which was...
Did you get that? Wonderful, wonderful.
It was like Baghdad's up here, and then Kuwait's down here, and we were kind of in the middle.
Okay.
And it was basically, they did operations, and it was kind of like a truck stop, too.
And that was what year?
That was in 2000. We boots on ground in 2006.
2006.
February of 2006. I was boots on ground. We actually deployed. So we started the deployment process where we went to. We did our home base, and then we went to Fort Dix, New Jersey. I swear, our unit had the worst holes. No, we didn't go to Fort Dix. Fort Dix was Guantanamo Bay. It was still a hole, but we went to Fort Dix for Guantanamo.
A hole, that's a technical term.
Oh my gosh. It's like if you throw a dart at the worst bases in the U.S., we got to visit them. You know,
I wonder if anybody from Fort Dix is going to hear this.
Well, I think anybody from Fort Dix knows, especially the operations for deployment were just so. But for Iraq, it was in. We were outside of Fort Bliss. We didn't even really get Fort Bliss. We were on some tiny little Air Force base that actually had a airman get sick from the hantavirus while we were there, which is the one that's carried by rats and mice. Yeah, that was, so it wasn't our crew, we didn't know, but still it was pretty intense. It was.
Is this where I ask, and how small was this base? Frank might be familiar with this. What was the name of it?
Are you speaking of McGuire?
I don't even.
Was it McGuire?
I think it was.
Uh-oh.
No, it wasn't McGuire. It was it was something like McGregor. But it was outside of Fort Bliss, and it was an Air Force base supposedly, and it had a store.
McLaughlin.
Yeah. A small store and a small defect.
Because Fort Bliss is Texas.
Fort Bliss is in Texas. We were in Texas, but we were like 30 or 40 minutes maybe even an hour north. And so we didn't get to spend a lot of time in Fort Dix.
But you didn't get to Holloman. You didn't get that far north.
No.
Up in Alamogordo area.
No, we were just, like I said, it was just, that's where they did the deployment stuff. So the range was out there. And
did you spend any time at Fort Lewis?
Not really. We did for training, some training while I was not deployed. So the training during, but we actually were Fort Lawton, which is in Seattle, close to, it was basically just a reserve depot, is all Fort Lawton was. And so we just had a couple of rooms there for the 1972nd Combat Stress Control. Our main, the main hospital, the 396th, was out of Vancouver, Washington.
How long were you in Iraq after the deployment?
I was boots on ground for a year.
Oh, 1 year, 12 months.
And Iraq itself, I mean, we got mortared every couple weeks, and it was kind of tough, and there's a lot of PTSD from returning soldiers and a few other things. Like one of our clients had been, while she was home, had been robbed at gunpoint.
That's traumatic.
And then she was there around guys with guns. So it was really, I got to help her work through that, which was really a tremendous honor. We had guys who had problems with home. One of the guys, his wife got raped while he was there.
Not good.
So no,
Not good.
So we had to deal with the trauma of that and him, and then we were able to get him home on leave. But so a lot of that, some of it was just your basic PTSD with wartime, stuff. Some of it was a lot of crap happened on the home front that the soldiers who were there had to deal with. And when you're in somewhere like Iraq, you don't have your normal coping mechanisms, whether it's a beer with your buddies, or whether it's shopping, or whether it's, golfing or football or whatever it is. You don't have those coping mechanisms. So you have to come up with whole different coping mechanisms out in the middle of nowhere where you're being mortared. There's guys that, really don't like you, and they're not wearing uniforms.
Oh, no.
So, it was pretty stressful. And for me, the command unit that I thought was going to be really great turned out to be horrible. The woman in charge of our clinic was a major. She was a psychiatric nurse practitioner, and she was direct commission, which means she went through about 2 weeks of training. Mm-hmm. And she was a Southern Belle, but not a good one. So she was horrible. So my time in Iraq, it was, as far as doing my job, was very fulfilling. As far as dealing with all the people there, it was so traumatic. I came home with severe depression and anger issues and feeling like a victim all over again. All the stuff that I dealt with at 19, 20, 21.
Sure.
I was dealing with all of those emotions all over again.
You're reliving that at a different
powerless
level.
And feeling, a whole year. Sergeant Grady, I blew up my blender. Can you please run to the PX during your lunch hour and get me another one? Sergeant Grady, could you please run to my room and get my pizza out of my fridge?
This is good. I like
Sergeant
this.
Grady. A whole year. I found this dirty, nasty CD case, and since you're just a sergeant and I'm a major, can you clean it off for me so I can use it?
Oh, I hear the Southern Belle right there.
A whole year of that crap. And she got...
I hope that major's out there listening.
Right?
It's like,
we called her Major Weakness.
Major Weakness.
But the problem too is the people that had the power to say no to her were taken out of that position of power, and she put in people who would say yes to her everything.
Well, I heard something interesting the other day, and I won't tell you who said it, but I use it, and there's a lot of truth to it, and it would apply to this situation. A's hire A's. B's hire C's.
Yeah.
You surround good people around you, or you can be insignificant, immature, and inconsequential, and hire lesser people that will be your minions. And sadly enough, we have too many of those folks today around us. But listening to something you said about dealing with the home front and the situation you're in, being deployed, I had a thought when I was on the Veterans Advisory Council here with Health and Human Services, volunteering, and wondering what the problem is today with a lot of our veterans. The problem is not with the veterans. The problem is that they're being deployed 3, 4, and 5 times. We don't have a draft. You're relying on a select few group of people to do a job that I don't know that is anything but endless at this point, the way it's being handled. When they come home, unlike when I came home, we didn't come home to the beautiful situation. We had our protesters, we had our flag burning, we had our idiots, you know. But we could go get a job, we could get married, we could start a life, buy a new car in the 60s, which many did, and you could go on with life. And if you want to refer to it as stuffing the experience, you stuff it. Maybe the ramifications came out later. But the fact is, a lot of the folks coming back today can't run out and get a job, can't perform a normal life, can't get on the track now that they're home and take a deep breath and relax, because I've talked to too many vets. I said, what are you doing? Are you working? No. Are you stationed at a base? No. What do? Just send you home until you get the next phone call. We're going to deploy you to some unknown far-off region of the world. So you never are able to focus, to settle down. That's the problem I see today. How do you look at it?
Well, so another faucet. Before I went to Iraq, I could run. I didn't really like to run, but I could run. I scored, I mean, like, I'm talking 96 percentile on my runs on a bad day. In Iraq, because of the tire burning, the dust storms that were frequent, just being around a whole bunch of dust and muck, I started getting frequent asthma attacks, chronic sinus infections, and migraines. So when I came back, my body was just, it was done.
So that's something else that you're dealing with.
Yeah, so I got home and I couldn't run anymore. I could not pass a PT test to save my Army career. I had planned on being reserve and retiring from the reserves. But my contract was 6 years by 8 years, and after 8 years, I was about 5 to 6 when I got home. I'd missed my window to re-up while I was in Iraq, but when I got home, I couldn't pass a PT test, and so I couldn't re-enlist. And then I got asthma, so I couldn't run. So basically, and instead of doing the nice thing, which would be to give me disability and let me, you know, retire on disability, they just one weekend I was there. And the next weekend, they're like, well, you have asthma, you can't re-enlist, you're done. So I served my country, and I did my best, and I come home, and I know it's nothing like, you know, what a lot of the Vietnam vets, but still, I felt like the Army kicked me to the curb. The only positive in that is that, one, I had a really good job. I worked for TriMet, and 2, because it was all documented when I came back, I was able to go to the VA and get some VA disability.
So where do you stand now with the VA hospital as far as benefits? So
I went to the VA and I got migraines and sinus conditions and depression, because back then, this was in 2007, 2008, unless they had a specific incident that would specifically be PTSD. I mean, and they didn't, my personal psychologist considered it PTSD, because, I mean, if you're in a fight or flight situation for an entire year,
sure,
you know, when you're getting mortared every couple of weeks, and you're driving through this country where somebody could set off an IED. That's stress, and you can come home with PTSD from
Sure
that.
it is.
The Army and the VA, however, were like, well, since there wasn't a specific incident that we could point to, you can't have PTSD, so we'll give you depression. And I was like, fine, I don't care what it is, I'm messed up mentally, so give me something.
The things you've witnessed, things that, as I refer to it, as tracers in the mind, fleeting thoughts that you have every day, waking moment, that go through and disappear and come back through and disappear, and you see faces, you see times, you see explosions, you see different things that, as we would put it, the normal person doesn't see. That is a normal life for us. And those are the thoughts we're talking about in PTSD. And again, let me repeat myself for anybody who's watching, that doesn't necessarily have to do directly from combat. I'm sorry.
Right.
So what we're trying to do is deny someone something that they've earned and relate it to a specific incident, when in fact, if you served and you witnessed a number of things, the end result is what you have. This is a real person.
I mean,
sitting here.
we saw the mortuaries.
Sure.
We saw the soldiers going out, you know, in flag-covered coffins.
There you go.
Went to a couple funerals. I mean, those things.
What do
leave
you
a mark.
think? What do you think those that served in graves registration that never were? Well, I can't say not in the combat zone, because today combat zones all around you. But those that worked in grave registration or worked in a
mortuary
hospital,
services or a hospital,
a medic, a corpsman.
Oh yeah.
But put those people in the rear area. Never saw combat. They're in the rear area. The ones that were tagging toes, the ones that were taking care of the wounded,
That leaves
the
a
ones
mark
that were striving to save a life. That leaves an impression absolutely indelible in your memory that affects you the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And people who haven't been there don't get it.
So I came back, and I was a very devout Christian for most of my life, and I was really involved in a church. And at the time I left, it was a pretty small church. And while I was gone, that church disbanded. So I returned with no spiritual support. My friends, because I was messed up, my friends were distant. I didn't feel, the only saving grace was my husband. If I did not have him, I don't think I would have survived. Just being able to talk to him on the phone, I was really lucky. I got to talk to him frequently because my job was in an office, and so we had MWR phones.
What are you doing now?
Now, I lost my job at TriMet because I missed so much work because of my migraines. But with that, I took my pink slip, and I took it to the VA, and since I'd already had disability for certain things, I said, look, I can't work. I lost my government union job because of my service-connected migraines. And so now I collect unemployability.
Okay. So you do get, okay. So you did get IU.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
I have unemployability. I'm still fighting with Social Security, and Lord knows that's because, you know, I'm 40 years old and I'm female and I'm college
IU
educated.
is important. I'm glad to hear you got the IU, and we don't have time to get into the medical aspects of that and the claims and the comp and pension with the military, because I work with veterans and I know how the system works. But you do have IU, individual unemployability.
I do.
You keep working on that. Do not give up. You pursue that. You appeal it, whatever comes down.
Exactly.
And I'm sure that it'll work out the way it's supposed to work out. Interesting story, interesting person right here. Thank you for your service. And for you out there, thank you for joining us again for the Veterans History Experience, and this is one heck of an experience. And until next time, you have a safe journey wherever life leads you. Thank you.
Thank you.